Hey, it's Shelby with At Home with Shelby, and we are going to be talking about some more education topics today. All right, our topic today is LGBT teachers and what's going on when they talk to kids in the classroom about their lifestyle. So, the first video we're going to look at is a teacher talking about appropriate pronouns. I haven't seen this video, so we're going to see what's up.
Today is my first day subbing in an elementary school rather than a preschool, and in preschool, you're just like teacher, your first name, but in elementary school, you're like Mr. or Mrs. last name. And so I've been trying to think and like decide what my teacher name is going to be, and I don't want to be Mrs. last name. Like I've never wanted to be Mrs. last name. So for a while, I thought like Ms. last name would be okay, but like, I don't know, I didn't love it. And then I was like, okay, how about Ms. H? Like Ms. H would be okay. But then last night I was thinking and I was like, Ms. H just gives like the vibes of like a woman, and that just doesn't. And so I was like, Mix H, like that just, like Mix H just sounds
stupid.
That just, and so now I'm having a gender crisis, but I'm also not quite brave enough to introduce myself as Mix H yet. So Ms. H it is for now. And apparently I need to update my pronouns. Okay, bye.
Okay, so we have this teacher who apparently is considers herself non-conforming to male or female gender norms. So she is wrestling with how to tell her children to address her in class. So there's a lot of nuance to this topic for me. The thing that I'm most concerned about when it comes to people who identify as LGBT, when that comes to students in the classroom, the thing I'm most concerned about is undue influence and indoctrination to kids. So at a baseline level, my beliefs are that whatever your belief is needs to be expressed in a way that is not unduly influencing and indoctrinating gullible or naive or young impressionable children. And so there are a lot of particulars of that. And honestly, I don't know how all of those things should work, but I do know that when a teacher introduces themselves in front of a class, it should not be in such a way as to make young children start asking questions about your sexuality, because that's not your job. They don't need to know whether you're attracted to men or attracted to women, or whether you call yourself a man or a woman. Like, that goes beyond, I have this identity, or I have this belief, or I have this identity that I want to tell people about. There's a very fine line that you have to figure out between, freedom of speech for teachers, right? Because there's people of all religions, of all different opinions. And then the line of how do we keep children from having to ask questions that are above the age level of appropriateness. So I don't really know the answer to that. Personally, I think it's a little bit of an absurd quandary that this teacher is wrestling with, but I do understand that people have real emotional suffering and struggles with this issue. So we're going to go ahead and go on to some of these other videos. I don't have a good answer for exactly what schools should allow teachers to say or not say. I think that whatever it is, it should balance freedom of speech with, hey, you're in charge of young children, and there are some things that you just don't need to talk about. So if there's something that this teacher wants to say that is going to spark a lot of questions about sexuality in really young kids, I think that needs to be thought through really carefully. We're going to go ahead and look at another video now and see what this teacher has to say.
As an educator, I am constantly worried if I am part of the problem. What do I mean by that? Well, public education is an institution that upholds lots of problematic systems in our society, like white supremacy and misogyny and colonization, etc. In my role as an educator, I try to undermine that BS in my classroom as much as I possibly can. I teach high school English, and whew, the white supremacy runs deep. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at how we write essays. Start with an introduction that includes a thesis. Always cite your sources. Use transition words like however and therefore. These are all made-up rules. They're arbitrary. They were created by Westerners in power. In linguistic justice, April Baker Bell calls this the language of respectability, or the language of power. Which got me thinking, what if I started my school year with a unit honoring how we talk rather than teaching students how to write properly? So this is the start of my series on teaching linguistics in high school.
Okay, so this is a slightly side topic from LGBT. So this is a little detour. But so this teacher makes the claim that her high school English class is perpetuating white supremacy. So I think, as always, I try to take a really nuanced approach to claims like this. There's some things you just kind of laugh, and I think you have to pause and take a moment and say, are there ever instances, for example, in this lady's literature class, is there ever an instance where someone has written something racist in literature and they were white? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I kind of think that's going to be a global thing. If you look in literature all over the world, there's going to be racism against other people. Okay, so I don't think that's the issue here. Let's step that back. So she's saying it's perpetuating misogyny, it's perpetuating white supremacy, it's perpetuating some colonial mindset of this is how we have to do things and how every other culture does things is wrong. So I think what stands out to me here is the demonizing of something as white or as correct. Oh, this is the right way to do it, and it's only right because the white people say so. And I really don't think that that's the crux of the matter. And I think that people who think this way kind of have lost sight of what we're going for. Of course, every culture has a different way of communicating. That's great. Different parts of the country have dialects. Different parts of the world have different ways of saying things. There's ways we say things here that's going to not make any sense over on the other side of the world, and vice versa, right? We have idioms, we have turns of phrase that don't translate well, and it's not bad to have a culture, right? And America is a little bit different in that very early on in our nation's history, we had cultures from all over the world merging and living side by side. And over time, we did eventually get to this a little bit more condensed thing called American culture. But to say that writing in a coherent way or writing in a structured way is white supremacy is, I mean, to be frank, it makes me, it just makes me laugh. It's really, really strange. It's really, really strange. So I think that if you go to a university in another country, if you go to a university in Africa or in Asia, they may teach a slightly different way of presenting your thoughts in a way that is coherent and makes sense. But to divorce, common sense of how to present something in a way that it makes sense to people, and to divorce that from cultures, or to put this wedge in between, okay, we're going to learn how to spell and write in a professional way, and then to say that is against other cultures, that's against African cultures, that's against Asian cultures. I think it's a dichotomy that doesn't have to be there. Something that my husband says a lot is language is to communicate. And if you're not communicating, then you're not using that language appropriately. So I think we have to kind of think, is the language controlling us, or are we using the language as a tool for communication? The language, whatever language we're talking in, it's not holy. It's not like, this language has to be protected and we have to give reverence to the language. Language is a tool for communication. And when you're in school, you're learning how to communicate well for life. So I think that deconstructing literature, deconstructing language and saying, let's talk about how you want to communicate, and let's hold that above, this agreed upon way that we teach communication so that we can all communicate. I think that really divorces school from learning. Like, what are we trying to do with education? We're trying to equip the kids to communicate in a world that communicates a certain way. And wherever we're failing to do that in school, we're failing, right? So if we're telling kids all that matters is how you want to communicate, all that matters is how your culture or your subculture communicates, then we're not preparing them for a world of people that communicate in very diverse ways and have a set of rules that they gather around and pay homage to as, this is how we agree that we're going to communicate in a business setting. This is how we agree that we are going to get information across in a way that our minds are all collectively trained to communicate in this way. I don't think it's a good or a bad thing. I think it is recognize the reality of, for a long time, this is the way that we've communicated, and we have to at least start there. Start with the basics. This is how people tend to communicate in this country, and this is what people tend to regard as correct. And then start there, right? That's the foundation, because we're trying to equip the kids kids for life, for school. At school, we're trying to equip them for life. And so then if you want to talk to kids about the differences in their cultures, if you want to talk to them about how different cultures all over the world present information in different ways, people are different. That's awesome. But to say that this is white supremacy or this is some sort of something that's trying to be shoved down people's throat, I don't think it has anything to do with white people wanting to talk a certain way. At least it's not what I care about. I care about effective communication. And I think that's what people need to go back to in schools when they're getting off on some of these like social justice and misogyny and LGBT and prejudice. Like, let's come back to what's really important. Treating people with respect, learning the foundational skills of the language. We're talking about English. English is a language that started in England, where a lot of white people live. So that's the language that we speak here in America, largely. If we're talking about communicating in English, it makes sense to talk about the rules of that language that have existed throughout the time that people group has existed. And that doesn't make it good or bad. It just is that language. And I think that a lot of common sense could be applied here. I don't think a lot of people are trying to enforce their white values on kids. I think that there's different cultures and that those cultures need to be respected. But at the end of the day, we need to give kids the tools that they need to learn. And unfortunately, learning how to put together coherent thoughts in an essay is one of those skills that's going to help them in life. And they can't just put words on a page and say, well, this is my culture. They have to learn how to proceed coherently in the context that they're being educated. So the next thing we're going to look at is another teacher talking about more pronouns.
This is why I'm an advocate for homeschooling.
A lot of people were asking in the comments of my last couple of videos about my anchor charts. So here you can see a couple of other anchor charts that I have about my pronouns. It says, my name is Mix Cogdill. My pronouns are Z, Zem, Zir, and Zirs. Mix C is my teacher. Z is multilingual. Students practice and speak Spanish with Zem. Zir hobby is learning languages.
Mix Z, Zum, and Zur. How is this gender ideology stuff allowed in schools? They're literally changing grammar. When I was in school, I had a hard time just learning math and Spanish. Yeah, I ain't doing that, teach.
So the teacher in this video is obviously identifying, we don't know from this short video, but obviously identifies as LGBT somewhere on that gender spectrum. And so their request, and honestly from what I saw, was someone that I would characterize as a female, a biological female human, just from what I saw, teaching in a K-12 classroom. It looked like possibly in the elementary, middle school range, although I don't know for sure. So we have this person coming into her classroom and saying, okay, these are my pronouns. This is how I identify. This is my sexuality. And that being a thing that they just start out from the bat like this. And I'm not saying they as any sort of thought about this person's gender. I am actually using it accidentally. So we're going to go back and say she, because that's my understanding of her biology, just from what I can tell. I believe, and this is my personal belief, this is not the belief of any particular organization, or this is just my personal thought. I believe that people are biologically male or female. And I believe that people that think that they are other than that are confused and should be treated with respect and should be given mental health care to help them reconcile who they are. And so I personally believe that those on the LGBT lifestyle are not actually these other genders. They are either male or female, and they are confused about that. So that is my personal belief, right? But taking that, kind of setting that over to the side, what I'm most concerned about in school is, are you bringing your personal life into the classroom in such a way that it is harming kids, in such a way that it is indoctrinating kids, in such a way that it is causing kids to ask questions that they don't need to be asking right now? So when you have a teacher coming in and saying, oh, well, I am actually not female, I am actually this whatever gender, and there's a lot more than LGBT now. There's constantly new genders being created. Some of them are based on animals, some of them are based on inanimate objects. There's all these new genders that people are constantly, making up out of how they feel, right? And that's what it's based on feelings. So this teacher's coming in and saying, these are my pronouns, this is how how I need you to refer to me, it tells kids a few things. It tells them that, well, first of all, it puts in their mind like, what on earth is this gender and why don't I know about it? And oh, people can be other than male and female. And I mean, I feel like in this culture, kids are being barraged with that kind of idea, right? That you don't have to be what you were made to be. You don't have to be, male or female. You can pick. You can choose what you want to do. It's all up to you. It's all up to how you feel. So that tells kids one thing, like, oh, my feelings are more important than facts. And then other people's feelings are more important than reality. And I have to tell other people what they want to hear instead of what's true. And then I'm sure there are all sorts of other issues you could dive into from there. Like, I would be uncomfortable with my child having a teacher that is LGBT if that teacher was doing what that teacher is doing. If that teacher came to school and just taught and did not bring up questions of sexuality in my child's mind, then I don't have a problem with that person. I don't have a problem with their personal decisions. I don't have a problem with what they do outside of education. But I do have a problem when my kid comes home from school and says, oh, so this teacher today isn't a man or a woman, and they have these strange pronouns and I've never heard of this. What is this, Mom? Can you be something other than a man or a woman? And I'm going to have conversations about that with my child, but I don't want to be having conversations like that because a teacher has broken the trust. So that is how I feel about teachers really digging into things like pronouns and LGBT concepts with kids in classrooms. I think that is putting way too much focus on sexuality and way too little focus on what actually needs to be done in school, which is learn about academics, especially when kids are not learning reading and math. So, let's start with that. There is another video we're going to look at here, and this is a queer teacher who is not allowed to come out to her students. So we're going to see what this video is all about.
So I'm not allowed to be out as trans non-binary at school. Do not come up in my comments saying that I am allowed, because I'm not. I live in Louisiana and it sucks here. So of course my response to this is to be as obnoxiously queer as possible. So I've got my rainbow hair with leopard print. I've got my rainbow glasses. Sometimes I wear pins too with various rainbow things on them. I don't have any today. I just have my COVID sticker. I wear things that do not match at all. Basically, my goal is to look like a unicorn threw me up. If I can't do that, what's the point?
Wow. Okay. So again, I don't know what this person's biological sex is. I am not going to venture a guess. So we are going to move forward saying this teacher. So this teacher is saying that in Louisiana, they're not able to come out as queer or as gay or as LGBT, whatever part of the spectrum this person identifies as. So their response is to be as obnoxiously queer as possible. So I'm just going to say that how a district deals with this kind of gender ideology is very specific to the district, and it is up to the school board of the district to make policies, and it's up to the families in the district to come to the school board and talk to them. And I would urge, when families do that, if this is happening in your district, I would urge you to go to the school board meetings. I would urge you to be part of the conversation. I would urge you to have compassion, because that is one of the things that really strikes me with some of these LGBT people, some of these, those who identify as queer. I want to treat them with respect. They are people. They're people. And I think that's the first thing we need to think about when we're deciding how we're going to address these issues in school. They are people teaching our children. So those are the two issues, right? How do we treat them with respect, while also prioritizing the whole point of school, which is the well-being of our children? So I would not, at this point in my life, I would not say, oh, there should never be LGBT teachers in school. Oh, there should never be, they should just not be allowed around kids. I do think that there should be policies in place that keep the emphasis on learning and keep the emphasis off a teacher's sexuality. So I think that that there should be policies across the board that give personal freedom to teachers as far as this, and this is just my personal opinion. I don't think that we should say, oh, well, you can't have a picture of your family on your desk because you're LGBT. But, over here, this heterosexual couple, you can totally have a picture of your family on your desk. I don't think we can say stuff like that. I don't think that would be fair. But I do think we can say, hey, you can't talk to the kids about, this part of your lifestyle. And I really don't think that would be an unfair rule to have across the board. Like, we don't need to hear about this heterosexual couple's relationship. We don't need to hear about this homosexual couple's relationship. And I think we need to be fair and acknowledge this is an issue that's going on across the culture. And if your kids are going to go to public school, they're going to see a lot of people who are dealing with this issue because it is mind-blowingly explosive today. Like, if you don't want your kids to have to think about LGBT issues yet, they're not going to be able to go to public school because social media and all of the streaming services and school and everywhere else your child goes is being inundated with these messages of diversity, equity, inclusion, love everybody, accept everybody, and do not challenge how they feel about themselves because how they feel is the most important thing. And so, just to be frank, you're not going to be able to get LGBT anything out of school. It's there. It's there. If you take all the teachers, if for some reason you were to ban LGBT teachers, which I don't think would be possible legally, nor do I think it would be the right thing to do. If you were to do that, it's still there. The kids are still bringing it in with them. So you're not, for those who may agree with me and believe that LGBT is not biologically correct, is not the way that we were made to be, that the LGBT movement is really more of a mental illness problem than a gender problem, then I would urge you, really think about what you want. Really think about what you want for your kids. Because even if LGBT teachers there can be policies to limit how much of some of this craziness is going on, how much of this obnoxiously queer as possible stuff is going on. That's not going to save your kids. That's not going to protect your kids. It's all around them. So really common sense policies do need to be made so that no teachers, LGBT or otherwise, can indoctrinate. And I'm talking about indoctrinate with their religion, indoctrinate with their sexuality, indoctrinate with their political agenda. None of that should be happening. It should not be happening for any religion in public education because there are people from all over and many different beliefs that all send their kids to the same school, and they all have the right to oversee how their child is raised. The Muslim parent, the Hindu parent, the Buddhist parent, the Christian parent, the LGBT parent, they all have the right to oversee how they want their child raised. What they don't have the right to do is say how you have to raise your child, and neither do the teachers. So that is a little bit of my thoughts about LGBT teachers. I hope that some of the nuance that I mentioned makes sense. I think that we should treat LGBT teachers with respect, and I think that we should keep the line at our kids don't need to know about your sexuality. And whatever policies we need to put in place in schools to make that happen and make that fair for everyone, I think that needs to happen. I don't think the LGBT movement is going anywhere, and at least not anytime soon. I hope one day our culture realizes that the affirmation approach that we're using is not working and it's hurting our kids. And so I hope one day that some of these gender dysphoria issues are recognized as the mental illnesses that they are. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think in the meantime, we need to be concerned about personal rights and how to protect our children between those two factors. So another thing that school boards and families might want to keep in mind when they're making policies in their district about how to protect their kids from things they don't need to be learning about yet is, well, I think about this teacher that we just saw who was trained to be as annoyingly queer as possible. I think that if the whole goal in the classroom is educating children, we have to think about what furthers that goal without unnecessarily infringing on a person's rights. And schools definitely have a lot of leeway in making policies that keep distractions down for kids. And the thing you have to think about here is, in the case of this, and I think they said they were trying to be as annoyingly queer as possible. I think what you have to think about there is there's other ways people can dress that are also super distracting. If that teacher is teaching you in class, you are not going to be thinking about reading. You're going to be thinking about why a unicorn threw this person up, as they said. And I think that's super distracting. And there are other things that can be distracting as well. So if people are wearing really political type of clothing, or if they are just going above and beyond to attract attention to something that doesn't further learning in the classroom or really stirs up controversy, I think that there has to be a clear policy in the district of dress code. And the secret here, the important part to remember is it can't just be, oh, you can't wear LGBT stuff, but you can wear a cross. You can wear a shirt that says Jesus saves, but you can't wear a shirt that says, I forgot some of their catchphrases, but has an LGBT motto on it about love is love or something like that. And I think you have to be really consistent across the board. Like, are you going to allow jewelry of your ideology, affiliation, or religion? Are you going to allow t-shirts with words on them? You have to be across the board. You can't just say this group can't have words on their shirts, but this group can. So you have to be careful. Like, oh, you can only wear solid colored shirts, or you cannot wear shirts that have words on them, can or cannot have jewelry. You would have to be careful how you phrase this, and that would be a lawyer's role to help phrase this correctly. But I guess what I'm saying is you can reduce some of that stuff that the queer teacher was doing by really having a dress code that addresses everything across the district. Have a uniform. Have a required professional uniform for the teachers, or say you can't have stuff written on your shirt, or you have to wear school colors. Like, there are things you can do to minimize. Now, you can't necessarily say, oh, you can't have your hair dyed a certain color, or like, you have to be careful when you get too far into some of those things, but there's a lot that you can do to minimize distractions and to minimize indoctrination just across the board. And that goes the same. It's not just against LGBT things. It goes the same for any other person. Like, I don't want a Muslim person wearing, all this stuff about Allah and telling my kid, like, I feel like it would go across the board. And I don't necessarily even want a person from another Christian denomination wearing a particular shirt and telling my kids, like, oh, well, this is what Christianity is like. Like, I want to be able to drive that narrative. So I think that was just something else I wanted to throw in there, is you can have common sense and reasonable uniform requirements, or requirements of what you wear to school or what you don't wear to school for staff, for students. And that can minimize some of the disruption, because that's really what this is all about, distracting from learning for things that kids don't need to know about, right? So that was just a piece I wanted to throw in there. Like, at the end of the day, school is for learning. School is for being prepared in life. It's for having a foundational level of factual knowledge to help you succeed in life. It is not about learning about one particular group's religion. It is not for learning about one particular group's ideology. To the extent that those things are taking over and replacing and trying to remove the influence of parents and replace it with something else, I think that those things they don't have a place in education. To say it more succinctly, schools are a place of learning. There is not a place for ideology, for political discussions, for a particular group's culture or religion to dominate the discussion and keep kids from learning. So school is a place for facts. School is not a place for how people feel about certain topics. It's a place where kids come to learn. It's not a place where kids should go to learn about a particular person's pet idea.